Prime Minister, I'm not asking you to speculate. I'm asking whether or not you still agree with yourself. You wrote a memo that had these ideas contained in it, taking away child benefit from people who earn £50,000 or more, increasing tax on share dividends and those kinds of things that are paid out to people with money, taking benefits away from some migrants. So are those things that you actually believe? Because they are things that appeared in a memo that was leaked that you supposedly wrote in March.
I'm not going to comment on a leaked memo. But what I will say is that me, the Chancellor, the Prime Minister and all other Cabinet members, we discuss these things. It's not rocket science that a government, when you're faced with a £22 billion black hole and some of the difficult decisions that we've had to make to secure our economy, we do have those discussions. But I'm also 100% behind the Chancellor and the Prime Minister in taking forward our programme for government, which is already seen 1 million people get a pay rise through the changes we've made to the low pay. Let me be clear, there is not a significant different opinion across government. The government has discussions. We do that in private. So I'm not going to comment on any memos or documents that have been circulated. I absolutely condemn anyone who leaks piecemeal information about what our government is up to. We work collectively as a government and I fully support the collective decisions that we make.
Now, I want to move on, but just on a factual point, is there an inquiry into how this leak happened?
Well, again, I'm not going to comment on the ins and outs of that leak. I condemn anyone who leaks.
And the principle of collective responsibility is an important one, which is why, as you say, leaks can be incredibly damaging for a government. And they also tell us about what is sometimes going on inside a government.
Well, I don't think it does, especially if you only get a piecemeal or some snippet. It doesn't give you a picture of what's going on in government, because I can reassure you that the government is solid as a cabinet. We work collectively together.
Laura describes the mystery note as X-ray proof of factional bones. Angela argues the skeleton is a single spine, but declines to identify whose hand held the pen. Make sure you like and subscribe.
Let's move on then to winter fuel, because the government reversed some of its position, having taken winter fuel allowance away from millions of pensioners. Nigel Farage says he would bring back that benefit in full for every pensioner. Will you?
Well, on your programme, I can't guarantee that because it has to come through a fiscal event and the Chancellor. So
you can't even guarantee that it'll be done in time for the winter. I mean, isn't this a bit cack-handed? Because we had for months Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and you sticking to that collective line, that discipline you were talking about, saying we're not going to change it, we're sticking to it. This week, the Prime Minister says, oh, actually, we're not sticking to it, but we're not going to tell you for months who's going to get it back.
Let me be clear.
And when it's going to happen.
What we had to do to secure the finances of this country.
But it's not clear for people then. You're telling them this morning they're going to have to wait months before they know. And rightly or wrongly, that's what you're telling viewers this morning, is that you want to change the position, but you're not in a position for months to say who's going to get their money back or by when, and when it's going to happen.
What we had to do to secure the finances of this country. When we took office, £22 billion black hole, my department was in the reserves for many of the key services. Councils were going bust. So we had to secure the economy.
And that's about the original decision.
But that meant difficult decisions. But then now the economy is showing signs of improvement. We've had the interest rates cuts. We're the fastest growing economy in the G7. Prime Minister outlined.
Any chance it will be in June? Any chance it'll be in June?
I'm not going to speculate when it will be. I've made it very clear what the Prime Minister says. It will be for the Chancellor to outline it, but he indicated that he wanted to see some movement when the economy allows.
Would you like
The Deputy PM contends that austerity first, generosity later. Laura points out that hypothermia runs on the clock of winter rather than the Treasury's.
Cap on families with more than two children, not being allowed to change tax credits to go?
Well, again, I'm not going to speculate on what our government is going to do. What I will say, Laura, is we have a child poverty task force, which I'm on. We look at all the different issues families face, particularly in poverty. Work is a challenge and making sure people have secure work. That's why we've got the Employment Rights Bill and we're improving wages. Housing is a huge cost to families now.
And we'll come to that in a second.
And we're dealing with the challenge of the housing crisis.
This is an important question because the government's child poverty strategy, which was meant to have the answer to this question, has been pushed back. I'll ask you again, would you like to see what's known as the child benefit cap, which is actually a limit on families being able to claim tax credits if they've got more than two children? Would you, as the Deputy Prime Minister, like to see that cap go?
Well, we're looking in the round at the challenges. That is one element, but there is a lot of challenges that I've just outlined that affect children in poverty. And I want to make sure we alleviate that. We're already rolling out breakfast clubs, which will save families money. We're already supporting families with a hike in their minimum wage. So there is a lot of work we're already undertaking to bring down the cost pressures that are on families at the moment, which will alleviate poverty for children as well. And if now the economy is the fastest growing in the G7 and we're getting on track.
Should child benefit be removed from wealthier people?
Well, again, we've said that we'll look at the child poverty situation in particular, and we want to work to ensure we eradicate
child benefit for people who earn more than £50,000.
Well, I'm not going to speculate on things like that. The Chancellor has already proposed what we've done, which I support, what we've done so far, which is around the non-dom status and around VAT on private schools, which has given us billions of pounds more to spend on our public services, which were left in a real mess.
But Deputy
Breakfast clubs and pay raises are poster kids. Lifting the cap is still the orphan in the waiting room.
And how confident are you that you are going to get, awareness is one thing, actually signing the metaphorical cheques is another. How confident are you that you're going to get the kind of funding you believe you need?
It's incredibly difficult and challenging times, and we will make that collective decision as a government, and I will support the Chancellor in making that decision. And we understand what our priorities are as a government. Yes, and that was always going to be...
changes you've made aren't working, are they?
Well, that was always going to be the case. It doesn't happen overnight. With things like this, you need lead-in. You've seen the changes to the National Planning Policy Framework. We've got the Planning and Infrastructure Bill going through Parliament at the moment. The OBR scored the highest score for growth against that at $7.5 billion, with the changes we've made already.
Laura questions if local budgets could hold their breath that long. The Deputy PM salutes the cheques she has, not the ones she still expects to land. Make sure you like and subscribe.
The OBR scored the highest score for growth against that at $7.5 billion, with the changes we've made already. I'm announcing today a consultation so that when developers come forward with planning applications, I expect them to say how many houses they're going to build as part of the planning year on year in the ground. They will be penalties.
It's worth saying to people, though, there have been numerous independent reviews have concluded that home builders don't sit on land. The CMA, the Competition Authority, looked at it only last year and they said there isn't really evidence of that. But I want to move on to just
Laura,
focus...
sometimes it takes 14 years to get some of these, once planning applications have been approved for these sites to complete. 14 years is far too long.
Angela waves a stopwatch and a stick. Laura shows her the doubting economist's spreadsheets.
And it's very clear, and that's what Keir Starmer set out, that those that aid has to get into Gaza now, and that Israel has to ensure that that happens.
Given that blockade on aid, given the many thousands killed, given the extent of the devastation that people have seen in Gaza, do you think Israel's breaking international law?
No, they shouldn't, but we should always look at what's happening and be objective, and sometimes you have to call out when things are wrong. Keir Starmer has been very clear right from the start. The 7th of October was a massacre for Israel and for Jewish people there, and it was absolutely abhorrent. Hamas has no place in a functioning government, and we're very clear on that. But you cannot block aid where we have a humanitarian catastrophe happening in Palestine, and that Israel has to ensure that that happens.
Given that blockade on aid, given the many thousands killed, given the extent of the devastation that people have seen in Gaza, do you think Israel's breaking international law?
Well, that's not for me to determine, but we've made our representations of concerns around what's happening on the West Bank. We've been very clear about aid getting into Gaza, and we've raised those concerns. It's pretty clear that the Prime Minister has said aid has to get in. The language that has been used by some ministers is inflammatory at best, and that we've called that out and said it's not acceptable.
Yet the principle of whether or not Israel is breaking international law is a very important one. And some of the UK's other allies, Spain has said it, France has said it clearly. The Foreign Secretary said it, more or less, and then took it back a bit later on in the
Well,
day,
no,
or
we've said
clarified
that's
his
a determination for the ICJ, and we've said that we uphold international law, and we're very clear on that. But we have raised concerns. You'll have heard what the Prime Minister said. Aid has to get into Gaza. The situation and the violence in the West Bank has to stop, and that we need to see a path for peace. We need to see the release of hostages, and we want to see a long-term solution where there is the two states of Israel and Palestine.
Laura asks for a decision. Angela presents a hung jury, cutting to alliance and denouncing methods of siege warfare.
In July, you said, hey, we've got to get on with it. There's no time to waste. Then in February, you said there were no excuses for not getting going. But then in the last few days, you said, I'm a straight talker. The target's stretching.
I've always said that.
But if you look at the numbers, the evidence is that the number of houses being completed since you've been in charge has gone down.
Yes, and that was
changes
always
you've
going to
made
be
aren't working, are
well,
they?
that was always going to be the case. It doesn't happen overnight. With things like this, you need lead-in. You've seen the changes to the National Planning Policy Framework. We've got the Planning and Infrastructure Bill going through Parliament at the moment. The OBR scored the highest score for growth against that at $7.5 billion, with the changes we've made already. I'm announcing today a consultation so that when developers come forward with planning applications, I expect them to say how many houses they're going to build as part of the planning year on year, to notify the council when they start it, and then annually to give us the amount of houses they've built amongst that target, and penalties if they don't meet those targets.
But the numbers have been going down since you've been in charge, and it's 10 months now. And perhaps the issue is that, look, housing is a market. Builders build if they're confident they can sell things for a decent price. And you have announced lots of changes, planning reform, all those sorts of things, but it doesn't seem to be having an impact on the confidence of the market.
Well, the market is very confident. I speak to developers all the time. In fact, I was with them just on Monday of this week. And what's clear is that they've very much welcomed the changes we've made, that we are starting to see the green shoots of that. That will come through in the next few months. The OBR was confident in the reforms we've made, and we've got to go further and faster. And that's why I've announced today the consultation. And if you land bank, if you don't build those houses quickly, you don't get those spades.
Ground still empty. Cranes still inactive. Angela is hoping regulatory adrenaline will revive the diggers.
Support growth in the UK.
But it is true that there are some people in the Labour Party who think that you do have an eye on the top job one day, and that's why sometimes things appear in the public domain about your beliefs being maybe slightly to the left of the Prime Minister, or you being, as you proudly say, being a straight talker and saying what you think. So what do you think? Do you rule out running for leader one day?
I do not want to run for leader of the Labour Party.
Do you rule it out?
I rule it out. I'm absolutely focused on working with the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. Look, this is...
Laura records the audio. History will determine whether never ages like stone or yoghurt.
They're private. We are 100% behind Shabana. That's an example of how we take things on.
And
it's not rocket science. That's how government works.
And I want to move on, but just on a factual point, is there an inquiry into how this leak happened?
Well, again, I'm not going to comment on the ins and outs of that leak. I condemn anyone who leaks. We are a government. We have collective responsibility as a government. Any leaks do not help anybody. We take things forward and we work together.
OK, let's move on then to winter fuel, because the government reversed some of its position, having taken winter fuel allowance away from millions of pensioners. Nigel Farage says he would bring back that benefit in full for every pensioner. Will you?
From housing pledges and Middle East minefields to leaking memoranda and shivering elderly, Kuenssberg guides Rayner over every open flank. The Deputy PM parries with fiscal constraints, task force catch-alls and an absolute never on leadership fantasies. Yet, the longer the probing, the more obvious the discrepancy between stated direction and dated delivery schedules. For Labour's number 2, the winter of political testing has only just started, budgetary events allowing. Let us know what you think down below in the comments.